Welcome to First Thing First Okanagan's Deep Dive Seminar Series. And tonight we have guest speaker Bryce Hayes. Before we begin, I want to honor that we live on the traditional and unceded territory of the Seal First Nations. They are Okanagan First Nations, and in their nation's anthem, it states, "We are beautiful. We are Okanagan because our land is beautiful." And I think we should all take these words to heart and keep them in mind when we look at opportunities to create a beautiful, resilient Okanagan community. I'd like to introduce Kinshift, which is an Indigenous-led initiative in the Okanagan that offers workshops for people who wish to cultivate meaningful relationships with Indigenous people, but perhaps you're unsure of where to begin. The Kinshift members are local, they are a Seal, and they host online workshops with stories and creative activities to guide you through strengthening your skills, to see different perspectives, to understand issues of equity, accountability, and inclusion from an Indigenous perspective. So Lori's going to put the Kinshift website in the chat. And if you think you might be interested in looking at some of their upcoming sessions, they're done over four 1-hour sessions, I believe. You can just check out their website and see what they're doing. My name is Margaret Holm, and I'm one of 3 board members of First Things First Okanagan, who have been doing these deep dive seminars for about 2 years. Also manning the Zoom controls is Lori Goldman, our Zoom technician, and co-host Sue Kirschman. We began hosting these talks about 2 years ago, kind of a response to COVID, trying to keep the climate action conversation going during COVID. And so far, we've had about 18 of these deep dive sessions over the past 2 years. We're always interested in new topics. So if you have some ideas on what you'd like to see for a deep dive, please put that in chat and we'd love to contact you. Lori's going to be recording the talk tonight, and she'll be sending out a video link so that if you want to look at it again or you want to send it to a friend who might be interested in solar, please feel free to pass it on. And she'll also be including any interesting references that to come up in the discussion. I'm going to turn things over to Sue Kirschman to introduce our topic and our guest speaker. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret, and hi, everybody. Here in the Okanagan, we're known for our sunshine. Annually, we receive about 2,000 hours of this clean, free energy source. So we live in an ideal location for solar energy systems. SkyFire Energy is Western Canada's leading solar panel installation contractor. They've installed photovoltaic systems since about 2001. And the company has designed and installed over 2,000 solar power systems across Canada, both grid connected and off-grid in hundreds of homes, as well as many of the largest commercial photovoltaic installations in Western Canada. SkyFire Energy is an employee-owned certified B corporation with staff in Calgary, Edmonton, Regina, and Penticton. Certified B Corps are a new kind of business that balances purpose and profit, and they're also committed to becoming net zero by 2030. We're very pleased to have Bryce Hayes with us this evening. Bryce is residential sales manager with SkyFire Energy. He is a solar specialist and a grad of the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology's Alternative Energy Tech program, and he will speak tonight about solar for the Okanagan. Bryce will cover the ABCs of solar panels, from how they work to rebate programs and BC's changing energy landscape. And we expect there will be a number of questions. And since we're a big group, if you could please enter your questions into the chat, and then Margaret will compile them to ask Bryce after he's finished his presentation. So with that, I will say welcome, Bryce, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. Let me just share my screen and get this presentation started. So just thank you for the introduction. So I'm Bryce Hayes, residential sales manager and employee owner of SkyFire Energy. I'm one of a handful of people that have been in this industry for a very long time. I started as a researcher studying solar PV in northern climates. I as well have acted as an electrician, a project manager, a solar specialist, and lately for the last 3 years have been operating as a residential sales manager for all of SkyFire Energy. So I've touched a lot of the different parts of this business and this industry, and I'm extremely passionate about this technology all across the world. So, but what we're focusing on here today is solar for the Okanagan. So we're really going to zero in on what's happening here locally, as well as more, provincially and interprovincially, with, Alberta being one of, our neighbor. And enough said about Alberta. We'll move on to the Okanagan. But so just a quick recap of SkyFire Energy. So we've been in business for 20 plus years at this point. It started with my CEO and founder's first system, which was actually the first system put into Western Canada. He put it on his roof 20 something years ago, a 600 watt system. It was extremely expensive per watt. He talks about that system costing around $40 per watt to install. Now, that was a very long time ago, and I want you to remember that $40 per watt figure. We have installed thousands of renewable energy systems across Canada, the majority of them in BC and Alberta, as well as Saskatchewan and the territories. Now, I was just having a conversation with one of my project managers in Alberta, and with the Jamin Homes group, we are just completing our 4,000th system with them. So this thousands number is growing every single year. I believe this year we brought on about 1,250. As well, we are probably one of the largest and most trusted solar PV providers in Western Canada, working with the biggest builders and most qualified individuals that we can get our hands on. In-house, we have over 200 years of combined solar PV experience. This is across the board with our professional engineers, our certified photovoltaic technicians, and our CSA certified construction electricians. We have individual, and what makes us kind of unique versus any other organization is when you're dealing with SkyFire, you're dealing entirely with us. We don't need to bring in any sub trades. We have all the engineers, installers, procurement, everything in-house. And this is a very wonderful photo of the latest team. This was just taken this year at our solstice party. And it was very unique for me because the shop next door that has the blank sign is where we started. And the bigger building on the right is where we're at today. So it's a bit sentimental for myself, who started sharing an office with 6 people in a place that should only house 1 person. Our vision is to bring the magic of solar power to the world for a stronger, healthier, and more sustainable global community. And we have done everything in our power since this vision was set by our founder for the last 21 years to achieve that goal. We do that through a number of certifications. As what was mentioned, we are a certified B Corp, joining the likes of Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, Tentree, in trying to be a force for good in business. We are one of 2 Canadian members of the Amicus Co-op, which is a collection of some of the largest solar providers in North America, sharing all the best practices that you can learn from a more advanced industry such as the United States, which is about a decade ahead of us in terms of their growth pattern. We're a climate smart business. We're a member of as many engineering groups as we can, Solar Alberta, we are Tesla's certified installer in Western Canada, and we are a core certified safety business. So that is the highest rating of safety that you can achieve. What we're all here for is why solar and why now. So right now, right where we are, the price of electricity has never been higher. If you're on a BC Hydro's tiered rate, you float around that 12.5 kilowatt hours, depending on tier 1 or tier 2, as well as FortisBC. It's a little bit higher in the city of Penticton because they purchase their power from FortisBC and BC Hydro and provide it to the residents. Right now, the solar levelized cost of electricity is about 8.5 cents per kilowatt hour on average. So if you install the PV system today, you're immediately going to be benefiting from the savings because you're now kind of locking in your price of power lower than what BC Hydro, FortisBC, Penticton can offer. And most of these organizations state between a 3 and a 6% increase in power per year in the price of power. So when you average that out, it's about 4.5% across the board, depending on BC Hydro, FortisBC, City of Penticton, District of Summerland. So when you lock in your price with solar, you're purchasing that power for the next 25 years, which is what we like to say is just the warranty period, where these assets are performing well into their 30s at a really high rate. So at currently constructed, solar's a good deal. As we project further and further out, it's an amazing deal. Mainly because of the changing energy landscape. This was posted in 2020, middle of the pandemic, that solar power is now the new king, and it's extremely difficult for us to get that crown knocked off. As you see on the chart on the left, the price of electricity from solar has declined almost 90% in 10 years. We were the most expensive form of power in 2009. And in 2019, we were the absolute cheapest. Now that is based on the scale of a megawatt, which is probably the smallest utility scale source that you're going to get as a single megawatt. And at that scale, we are cheaper than everybody. And that in itself is going to be a little bit of a misdemeanor, because what I'm about to show you next is that the modules themselves have been getting better and better and better. Right now, so just for a little context, 6 years ago, the biggest module I could get my hands on was about 235 watts. My standard offering today is 395 in 6 years. So we're going up really well. Now, this is happening all over the place for a number of reasons: split cell technologies, more and more investment into this space is just making the modules better and better and better. Now we're starting to see this effect slow down. I'm not really seeing the massive jumps we saw in 2016, 2017, where we went from 29.8% efficiency to 45. That jump has slowed down, where I've seen some modular increases going from 455s to 475 on a commercial grade module, but I didn't see the 300 to 375 watt jump that we saw that year. So things are slowing down, and we might be reaching the peak of where this technology can go within the polysilicon design. Now, this last year has been very unique because as people have studied, the cost of the modules dropped about 75% every 10 years. Now, I think that's not going to drop all the way to zero, because things can't really do that. And recent studies have shown that when the world demands it, prices go up. We've seen inflation, take place across the world, where everything's a little bit more expensive, and solar PV is not immune to that, as people once thought. So, but at least where we're at is that the technologies have been becoming cheaper and cheaper with the increasing production. And then we enter a very nice cycle where the more development we get, the prices continue to fall, creating more competition, creating more demand, and then more and more development. So we've been seeing a beautiful trend that has seen us fall from, like I mentioned, the most expensive technology on the planet for electricity to the cheapest. But I see that kind of stagnating now, and we're probably where we're going to be for the next handful of years. Like I mentioned before, that levelized cost of electricity for solar today is better than what you're typically paying in a Western Canadian grid. Now, the levelized cost of electricity is taking that entire system cost, plus the financing, plus the maintenance cost over 25 years, dividing it by that energy production over the warranty period of the equipment to get that levelized cost of electricity. Now, to me, this means that it's kind of like locking in your power for 25 years. If today is a better offer from solar than where we see, your utility be able to provide it. Now, this is allowing you, especially if you're on a fixed income or you're moving into retirement, to fix one cost in your life. You can hedge against the rising costs of the utility. Utility costs and utilities in general are a bit of a monopoly. There's Fortis BC, there's BC Hydro. That is the vast majority of the power in BC. That is not much competition, and they keep raising rates, and they're not really going to stop because there's nothing that says they should. But what you can do as a homeowner is this is one way you can actually fight against that. You can take control of your electricity and the cost of that moving forward. And then what a lot of people are probably here to talk about and have questions about is the Greener Homes Canada Grant and Loan Program. Now, this has been a fantastic program for Canada. I just saw a stat today that about 4,000 systems have been put online across Canada using this program, which was the third largest of any of the upgrades except that are applicable to it. Only falling behind heat pumps, which I'm very proud of that as well, and the Windows upgrade, which is very important as well as we move from the older home styles to a new, very energy efficient window style. But for most, talking about solar, you're looking at a grant up to $5,000 for that system. Now, it is $1 per watt up to $5,000. So to maximize the grant, you need a 5 kilowatt system. And a 5 kilowatt system is, most likely capable of producing between 5 and 6,000 kilowatt hours per year. The average home in BC is using about 11,000 kilowatt hours. Now, there is an additional $600 in funding towards that EnerGuide evaluation, which you need a pre and a post retrofit evaluation. Typically, that's costing about $800 in total. So I like to say that this grant is closer to about a $4,800 grant, depending on where you live, just due to the cost of the evaluations that are required. Then they also recently launched the interest-free loan, which is up to $40,000, interest-free on a 10-year term. Now that, of course, is going to go to, it is still within the NREL Greener Homes Grant program, but it is going to be, not everyone I think can qualify for this, just like any loan, because it does have to go to an underwriter and get approved. Right now, especially with the cost of money these days, interest-free has been a very lovely word to hear, a statement to hear again, that I haven't heard in a long time. So this has been a large mover for the solar PV industry since the introduction of the loan, and especially through the introduction of the grant. It takes a very long time. It is the federal government. It is frustrating. It is slow. It is worth it though. There's not many things that I could say is going to be worth the wait. This is definitely one of them, because $5,000 is typically about 25 to 30% of the system cost. And if you can finance it for free over 10 years, typically we're seeing systems pay themselves off in 10 years. So the system itself is going to pay for the loan. Fantastic. I love that. Unique to SkyFire is we have worked with NREL, who has determined the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions from solar PV and the entire upstream, downstream manufacturing, construction, and recycling process that would go into a PV system amounts to 1.05 tons of CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour of solar installed. Now solar has always been a net positive investment in terms of carbon, but we have developed a system that allows customers to do that from day one by purchasing carbon credits through our partner Radical, who is allowing us to then offset the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions from solar for day one, so that homeowners can start with their investment at a positive effect for the environment and not have to wait the typical 3 years that it would have been for a solar PV system to pay off its carbon. So this is extremely unique that I believe we are the only solar company in North America, at least. I don't know about the world that does this. So how does solar work? Let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. Do we get enough sun? Absolutely. Germany, before China took over as the world leader for solar, Germany was the world leader for a very long time with installed capacity. And as you can see, our resource dwarfs theirs. China itself doesn't, they're not even here. So they are the world leader, and yet we have a significantly better resource. And you can see in southern Saskatchewan, southern Alberta, and southern BC, we have a fantastic opportunity for solar PV systems to be wonderfully productive. And one of the most interesting parts about solar here in Canada is that when solar is studied, it is studied in California and Nevada, places with a much higher ambient temperature than we have. And what solar PV modules are at its very core is a computer chip. And computers, when they're cooled, work more efficiently and last longer. So what we actually have is a very unique situation where we have a very strong resource and a really low average ambient temperature, where our resources are lasting far longer than the ones that you see if you're driving through Nevada, those massive facilities near Vegas. Those facilities are not lasting as long as they're saying, whereas we see them here in southern BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan going far longer and have a much slower degradation. So how it works is very simple. On the roof, you have the solar PV modules, which are basically just going to passively convert the sunlight into direct current DC power. Now that in itself is going to get connected to an inverter system, either a microinverter or a DC optimized string inverter, or a traditional string inverter as well. It's not optimized. That gets tied in directly to, so that inverter is going to convert the DC electricity, sync with the grid to convert it to a perfect AC electricity that's going to match the grid frequency and allow it to just seamlessly integrate with the home at 120, 240, or if it's a commercial system, at what that voltage needs to be. That in itself just gets connected with a 2-pole breaker into your main electrical system. And as electrons do, they're very smart. They're going to go where they're needed. And this is all going to happen in real time as the power is produced. If the electrons are needed to be at a load in your home, it's going to go power that load. If there's no loads to power, it's going to flow right through your meter onto the grid. You're going to sell it to the utility, whichever one you're connected to, and then that utility is going to sell it right to your neighbors. So if you're an individual homeowner in a neighborhood, you can take a little bit of solace in you've also greened the electricity that your neighbors are going to be experiencing, but you're going to get paid for it. Now, all utilities here in BC and Alberta allow you to sell power to the grid. With Fortis BCs and BC Hydros, they give you the blended rate of your tier 1 and tier 2, the weighted average of what you spend in tier 1 and tier 2. That's the price that you sell to them. So that is about as 1-to-1 as you can get when you sell power back to the grid. Working across Canada, Fortis BC, in my opinion, has the #1 net metering program that I don't know if a solar company could design a better net metering program. They also allow you to bank your credits over the winter so that your every anniversary date is on March 31st. So you can produce all your power in the summer, get a credit bank built up to use throughout the winter, and then as soon as the sun starts shining again in the spring, you're back producing power again. It's absolutely fantastic. The inverter itself is very simple, but this is probably the component I think people overlook. They see the modules on the roof, they see the shiny modules, and they think, wow, that's amazing. The modules, if you're getting them from a tier 1 manufacturer, really does not matter. They're pretty good across the board at the highest level, and that's where you need to be. The inverter itself is doing all of the work. It is actually connecting to the grid. It is alternating that current. It is making it so it all works together. And if your inverter fails, doesn't matter how much money you spent on modules, because those are just going to sit there on the roof waiting for you to connect an inverter to it. So if there's a decision to be made on, hey, do I spend more on a little bit flashier, a little bit better of a module, or do I go for a better inverter? I will always tell people to take the inverter system, because that is where if you're going to see a point of failure, it's at the inverter, because he probably went for a more low cost option, where this is the hardest working component. It's also the only component that has any moving parts. The modules on themselves are completely passive, where the inverter is doing everything. Another good thing here to discuss is what makes a home a great fit for solar. Now, sloped roofs facing south, east, west, ideally a newer roof is going to be perfect, and you're going to need quite a bit of space. Each module is about 6 feet by 3.5 feet. That's quite big. And so you're going to need quite a bit of space to get up there. A 5 kilowatt system is 14 of those. That's quite a bit of roof space. A sufficient electrical panel capacity. Now, this isn't, do I have a 100 amp service? Do I have a 200 amp service? Do I have a 400 amp service? What this also refers to is the bus bar capacity, which this might be the first time a lot of people here are thinking, what's a bus bar? The bus bar is what the breakers all tie into. Now, if a 100 amp panel has a 125 amp bus bar rating, it can get 56.25 amps of solar tied into it. Now, a 200 amp service with a 200 amp bus bar can only get 50. Doesn't matter that it's a larger service. It's what is the difference between the bus capacity and what is that service size? Typically, I would recommend that if you're looking into upgrading your electrical services, you speak to, and you're interested in solar in the future, speak with a solar PV company first. Most electricians don't look at the code book in the small section that we actually apply to with solar and renewables. And it's new to them, where talk to people who have been doing it for a very long time, because the difference between that 125 amp panel or the 225 amp panel and the 200 amp panel is very small if you're getting it done at the same time. If I have to come back and tell you, hey, we need to upgrade this panel to get the system size that you want, you're typically looking at $3,000 to $4,000 to make that upgrade possible, that you could have handled, during construction with a new build or during an upgrade with a general service electrician. Daytime energy use is also important, because then you're also able to just benefit from the solar. If you're home, and using power throughout the day, and you have solar, you're using the vast majority of your power is produced by you on your roof right into your loads. I see a lot of people in Alberta, when we work with them, because they have transmission and distribution charges, that when they use their power, they're actually able to reduce those fees as well. Doesn't necessarily apply here to the Okanagan, but it is important to just sometimes use what you create, which I think kind of falls in line with the Okanagan. So the benefits to homeowners, you're able to, like I mentioned, you're able to lock in those electricity costs at a lower rate today and protect yourself moving forward. There is very little ongoing maintenance for these systems over 30 years, especially if you're getting your system by a reputable installer using high quality equipment. There are a lot of companies out there that have jumped into the solar market and have seen it as a gold rush. I can tell you for sure it is not a gold rush. It is an industry that you really need to care about the product you're putting on people's roofs. The engineering needs to be done correctly, because this equipment is going to be out there in the world experiencing all the forces, our freeze and thaw cycle, for 30 plus years. It needs to be done correctly from day one. The no additional costs. The vast majority of the components are warranted as long as the system is expected to last. That is why you might spend a little bit more on a system to get it from good companies that are bankable, not to just have a lower ticket price up front. This is a 30 plus year decision, and it needs to be taken as such. And studied in the States, not necessarily studied here yet, you're able to increase the resale value of your home. When we're talking, it was studied in the New York Times that it was when you had solar on your home side by side with your neighbors, identical homes, but you have solar, they don't. You are adding about $3.50 per watt to the value of your home, where today, most of the time you're buying systems at $2.50 a watt. So immediately you could put it on your home, sell your home, get the value back out plus some. And the solar return on investment here in the Okanagan, if you're on the Fortis BC system, you have the highest rate of return typically from any system. Now this is on average. The city of Penticton has the second, sitting at about just under 7%. BC Hydro's a little bit lower, sitting at about 6.3%. If you go against a GIC or a savings account, immediately it is a decent investment and has a very high ROI, and that is in its first year. So how long will a PV system last? Typically, the vast majority of the warranties, you're looking at a 25-year warranty on the solar production. I did mention that this equipment does degrade slowly. So year one to today, from the vast majority of manufacturers that are any decent, they're giving you a guarantee that from day one to year 25 is going to be rated about 85% of what it was day one. Most manufacturers for inverters start with a standard 12-year warranty that you can extend to 25 years for a small fee. We also ourselves offer a 5-year installation warranty on all of our workmanship. Anything we've touched, I don't care if you're in Nelson and I have to come fix something I did, you're not going to pay for it for 5 years, or any of my electricians have done. This is where I studied, was what happens when it snows. So we studied this at NATE over 5 years, and snow has an extremely negligible impact on solar performance over the year. Simply put, we don't get enough sunlight in the winter to really care if there's snow on the modules or not. On average, you see about 2.3% difference in someone who would go sweep off their array, and that was me. I was the guy sweeping off the array every single day of the winter versus the guy who does not get on the roof, who just lets the snow fall, come back, fall again, because the snow will clear itself like quite a bit faster, given that it is glass and aluminum versus an asphalt shingle roof, which is quite sticky, quite a high friction coefficient. So is Canada a very snowy place, and is quite a large myth that solar doesn't work here? We have a winter, we have snow. Snow has very little to do with it. You produce about 14 times more power in June than you do in December. So the amount of power we lose from snow is very small anyway. So typically we know this and we include this in our modeling. And so I can provide you with a system that includes the anticipated snow losses and can guarantee a very high accuracy when I say this is a 10 kilowatt system, it's producing 11,000 kilowatt hours per year. We include all of these numbers. Will solar modules stand up to hail? Now there should be this little video right here, but we're not going to go to it today. Yes, almost certainly. So any decent module today can take a 1-inch hail at 55 miles per hour at, believe it is 32 critical locations on the module and continue to work. We had 20 years of solar installations in BC and Alberta, and hail is quite a bit bigger of an issue in Alberta. We had 20 years of installations, and we had yet to have a single module get damaged from hail. Now that, unfortunately, we cannot say that anymore because there was a massive storm that rolled through the northeast of Calgary about a year ago, and it didn't just destroy solar. It ripped siding off walls, it broke every window in the area, it left nothing to be unscathed from its effects. But you can take a lot of solace in the fact that in rare occasions, your solar PV system could even be damaged by hail. And this is why I encourage all of our homeowners, if you're going to buy a PV system, include it on your home insurance. We just talked about lots of warranties that cover this and that. Nothing covers you like adding it to your home insurance policy. Typically, there is no additional fee or a slight fee because now the home, your home insurance policy maker is considering your home to be more valuable because you've just put $20,000 on the roof. Will it generate on a cloudy day? or even a smoky day? Yes, it will. You know, typically you're going to see weather effects year to year. Now, that is why I typically like to size my systems to about 105 to 107% of your annual electricity, because year to year, depending on smoke, clouds, weather, and just localized weather patterns, you see about a plus or minus 5%. And that's compared to my best modeling capabilities of the actual performance. So at 107%, you have quite a bit of variability to still offset a vast majority of your power and continue to have, you know, extremely low power bills. Will my home have power when the grid goes down? No, unless you have a battery backup system. If you just have a solar PV system that is grid connected, it is going to turn off when the grid goes down, because you cannot backfeed power to the grid and onto the power lines that people are trying to fix. Now, if you do have a battery system, you can keep the power interrupted throughout the entire blackout or rolling blackout that you might experience. EV charging. So this is a very simple technology, depending on what you want to do with it. I always say to find the car you want to purchase first before you purchase the charger. Teslas without an adapter only work with Teslas, Tesla's taken the Apple approach versus every other car manufacturer on the planet has a very similar plug that works with all of them. But and I always do say to find the car first, because the vast majority of EV chargers only come with a 2-year warranty. And if you're going to buy an EV in 5 years, but you want to include an EV charger with your solar system today, by the time you get to use that product, the warranty might be up. But it is very easy to add for the vast majority of homes to add an EV charger. Level 2 EV charging is kind of what you're targeting, because level 1 is just plugging into the wall. That's just any regular outlet will get you level 1 charging at about 15 amps, which is really 12 at 120 volts. Level 2 takes you to 240 volts, anywhere between 15 and 80 amps, where the vast majority of cars have a throttle on it where they can only accept up to 50 amps of charge at 240. So that's typically where we target for homeowners that want level 2 charging on site. Battery storage is fantastic in the right situation. Now, it's going to give you the ability to have power when the grid goes down. You know, if you're looking for off-grid living, the Tesla Powerwall is a fantastic solution for the longevity and the amount of cycles you get from it. You can get a much cheaper battery option for off-grid living, but you're not going to get the 10,000 cycles that Tesla is guaranteeing. Most AGM batteries are going to give you 3,000, maybe 4,000 cycles. So you're going to be replacing that 2.5 times by the time you get to the life cycle of a Tesla. Now, that's where you find the difference in the price. If we ever, in anywhere here in BC, if we actually move to a time of use billing structure, battery storage is going to be your absolute best friend. Because when you're using your power, which is in the morning and the evenings, you pull from your battery storage, where it's far cheaper than using it from the grid. I would ask anyone to just look at the billing structures of California, and that is horrifying if it ever actually came here to Canada, because it's going to punish people who can't put a Tesla Powerwall on their wall. It's absolutely going to make the price of power skyrocket for the vast majority of families if it ever came into play. And another Tesla Powerwall installation, at least from us, this isn't the process you're going to see from other companies, but what we do is a preliminary assessment. So typically we like to speak over the phone with our homeowners, get them an estimate, see what solar can do for you, and see if it's something that you want to proceed with. From there, before we issue any quotation, we're typically coming to site and we're completing an electrical analysis, we're completing a structural analysis, we're getting it looked at by engineers, both electrical and structural. we're doing a drone flight, which will fly your property and produce a 3D model within about a few millimeters of accuracy. So I can show you exactly what the PV system looks like on your roof before you even have to make a decision. From there, if you want to move forward with the system, all I need is an approval, a signature on the quote and a deposit. And depending on, where we are in our schedule, it's anywhere between a 25% and a 50% deposit. From there, I basically am, for myself as a residential sales manager, am out of the picture, and you're into our project management team and for project preparation. Now that is going to be getting your net metering application in place, getting any building permits, any electrical permits, getting all the product in place. And, that's going to be actually quite a quick process. Right now, it's mainly going to be the waiting in the installation queue, where a lot of homeowners are moving forward with solar these days, and there's not enough solar companies to meet that demand. From there, installation is going to take anywhere between 1 and 5 days, I would say, on site, for the vast majority of homeowners experiencing probably a 2-day installation. From there, we reach out and get electrical and building inspections complete. Then if there is any bidirectional meter replacement required, that occurs. From there, a system walkthrough is performed with our project managers and the homeowners, the delivery of any O&Ms, warranties, all the guidelines so that you can care for your system over its lifetime. And from there, you're able to turn on the system and start producing your own power. My favorite roofing material, if anyone's looking at replacing their roof, is standing seam metal. And if we have any questions about that later, I'm happy to explain why. But these are just a couple of our systems. And this is one of my favorite photos, because on the left, you'll actually see an older system, not one of the first ones, but this is in McKinley Landing. And that's one of the first systems we put into there. And then that flat roof system on the right is one that I put in. And it is an interesting one because we had to avoid that main upper roof, which was facing north and has a moving shadow throughout the day. So you can kind of see where technology is moving. You had the traditional blue cells, silver frames, and then that is a flat roof system. So I was comfortable using a commercial grade module, which is a black split cell technology module with a silver frame and a white backsheet. And then again, on this sloped roof, this is in Calgary, Alberta, and just a nice size system, that's probably a bit larger than the average homeowner requires. And in case you have any solar questions, solar emergencies, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. We are no longer in Penticton. We've recently moved our office to West Kelowna to service the valley quite a bit better. I'll stop sharing, and I think it's probably off to questions.
Okay, we do have some questions.
Okay.
First one was about what if you install solar and then you have to do some roof repair, or when you need to reshingle your roof? What's the situation there?
So I typically, like, if you have to replace your roof in the next 10 years, I would say we explore that option first before you add solar to the roof. The process to remove the system is very simple. You talk to your solar PV provider, they come pull the system off, the roofers do their thing, and the vast majority of the equipment can be reinstalled on that roof if it's the same roofing style. Unfortunately, though, that's going to cost you something. Typically, I would prepare my homeowners for anywhere between $3,000 and $5,000 to pull that system off the roof. So if you know you're going to have to replace your roof in the next 5 years, let's not do it. Let's not do it yet. Typically, the rule of thumb I give people is if the system's going to pay itself off before the roof needs to be replaced, it's a good option. But typically, if the roof's between 0 and 10 years old, it's a good option. But if you only have a few summers left in it, maybe we explore that option first, just so you can avoid that expensive removal and reinstallation cost, which is almost entirely labor.
Great, thanks. A second question is, there's someone that has been accepted by the federal Greener Homes program. There's a real stall in getting approval. So do you have any comment on whether is that, I've heard other complaints, are things getting better? Is it just What's your experience with how long people have to wait?
So for the grant or for the loan, if there's a clarification.
I'm not sure. Perhaps that person could unmute and speak up what exactly he's waiting for in terms of approval. Or type it into the chat, perhaps. But in your experience, has it gone fairly smoothly?
It's gotten better. Still slow. It's the federal government. But what I've been hearing from the energy auditors that I typically speak to is that if you're waiting for that loan approval to move forward with your system and you know it's in the process, that you can get some movement on it by calling in and making a stink. But that's about all you can do at the moment, it seems.
Great.
But yeah, the main thing though is that if you have applied for the grant and you have performed that energy audit, you have security in knowing the grant's coming. It just might take a little bit longer. You don't have to, but I will not show up to someone's site and actually begin installation until that first audit has been performed, because if that has not been completed, you're at massive risk of you losing your grant.
Okay. We have another question about municipalities. You've probably worked with a lot of different ones, as well as different ones in Okanagan. What should we do to encourage municipalities to encourage solar? Like what are some of the barriers that you see?
Honestly, the municipalities aren't so bad outside the city of Penticton. It's the utilities, and they're the ones who control all the programs and the buybacks and the net metering policies. It's tough to encourage a municipality to do it if they don't have control over their grid, like the vast majority of municipalities do, where the District of Summerland, the city of Penticton, the city of Grand Forks, those are some of the only utilities that are city owned in the province. So it probably just takes a little bit more education for those municipalities. But most of them already have a net metering program in place that's fairly reasonable.
Okay. And one person asked would net metering ever, do you think municipalities would ever actually buy back power more than the home uses? Or is it pretty impossible for a solar rooftop system to be big enough that you'd be selling quantities back?
No, it's absolutely possible. But what they've done is so you can actually do a bigger system that you produce today, that you consume today. But past typically the 110% mark, if you're trying to do 200% of your annual electricity, they have destroyed the economics. So when you're doing it within the net metering policies, which typically allows up to 110%, you're getting that same one-to-one exchange. Everything above it in excess at the end of the year, they're going to give you the wholesale rate for electricity instead of the retail rate of what you typically pay. And the wholesale rate is 15 to 20% of what the retail rate is. So it takes the economics and it absolutely tanks it. So it's typically not worth it for the homeowner. Great.
Okay. And probably the municipality doesn't want to buy expensive power back either.
No, yeah, like it's just, I see it's probably never going to happen if they allow you to do that. It happened in Ontario where they were paying upwards of 50 cents a kilowatt hour at one point in a solar gold rush about 15 years ago. And that program had a lot of uptake. A lot of people installed solar and made a lot of money on it. And I don't see them ever going back to that anywhere in Canada.
All right. Now, a couple of people don't have rooftops appropriate for solar power, but they're wondering about panels on the ground or these towers, rotating towers. Does your company install many of those types?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I would caution against like an auto tracking system, because one of the main benefits of solar PV is the low maintenance costs. Now, as soon as you introduce mechanical systems, motors, there's maintenance. Now, with those systems, you absolutely are able to generate more power for the like throughout the year, typically it's in the 20 to 25%. It's a huge boost. But if you have to break out a mechanic every year, every 2 years to service those motors, where did your savings go? Now, it works when you have limited roof space and it's absolutely an appropriate system. Typically, when I do a ground mounted system, I'll make it seasonally manual adjustable. So there's very few moving parts. It's a couple levers versus complex machinery. So you can still benefit from it. Now, it's very tough here in the Okanagan to do a ground mount properly because the vast majority of where we live is on the sand cliffs, or, so when you're securing it to the ground, you have to go 18 feet deep with a screw pile to make sure it's protected from our wind load. Because if it's going to be fully exposed from the backside, it's going to experience a large amount of forces throughout its lifetime. So it needs to be secured to the ground properly and engineered properly. That's also where we've seen a lot of concrete foundation work come into play. And so if you're doing a ground mount system, it's going to be far more expensive than putting it on your roof because of all of the additional stuff that has to go into it to make it possible. But it's absolutely doable.
Thank you. I think we'll just have one more question, and that is someone who asked, with the smoky skies that we're seeing as kind of a regular summer occurrence, is this going to have an impact on the solar production?
So that has been kind of my pet project for the past few years since I came to the Okanagan. It was my first curiosity is how does these smoky seasons, which I grew up in Alberta, we typically didn't have this amount of smoke. Had a lot of snow. That's what I studied first. Now, it has been very interesting, the phenomenon of smoke and its effect on solar PV performance, because I've had situations where I'm pulling up monitoring systems on my systems out there in the Okanagan, and I can't see out my window from the smoke, yet we have decent performance. Yet I've had situations where maybe I can't see across the lake, but we are having horrible performance due to the smoke. And what I don't know this for sure yet, but I'm pretty sure it's due to the parts per million in the smoke, because it is refracting and reflecting the photons from the sun's light, which is what is actually creating the power, is the photons. It's nothing to do with heat to actually create the power. So it's definitely doable, but it is very hard to quantify what those actual effects have been. And I don't know if it's necessarily a new normal. I mean, we had a beautiful summer this year. I'm new to the Okanagan, so I'll let more experienced people speak to if that is becoming more and more prevalent. But typically, we don't know how to quantify that yet, and I don't know if anyone actually does in the world at this point.
Great. Thanks for your very thorough answer. I think I'll pass things back over to Sue. Thanks very much, Bryce, for that presentation. You packed a lot in, and of course, people should realize they can contact your company if they want to have their home assessed or looked at further.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see, I just because it's right on my right hand side here, Susan LeBlanc, standing seam metal roofing is by and far the best, because how it's attached to the roof. You don't actually penetrate through the membrane, which requires flashing and protection. You actually torque to the seams. So there's actually no point of penetration through the roof. And the best way to prevent leaks is to have no possibility of leak.
Well, thank you so much, Bryce, for sharing all your expertise. And thanks everybody for attending tonight. I just wanted to mention another Zoom seminar about solar energy that's coming up next Monday. Well, that's November 28th at 11 o'clock our time. It is called Community Renewables, Solar Energy Local Best Practices. And it's hosted by Climate Caucus, which is a national organization that focuses on municipal climate solutions. So if anyone's interested in attending that or learning more about it, Lori will put the link into the chat, and you can just click on that to find out a bit more. Also, first things first, won't be having a deep dive in December. but we are making plans for the new year. So keep an eye on our website, or you can subscribe to our newsletter to learn about what's going to be coming up in January, February, March, etc. And I think that is it. So thank you again for joining us, everyone, and hope to see you next time.